business model. And I'm gonna I think we're on 6, 7 o'clock, so let's kick it off. It's recording anyway, so anybody who's late can check it out later. Thanks so much for coming tonight, guys. It's going to be a little bit technical for the first 10 or so minutes while I wade through the background, where the winery comes from, and then we'll start looking in some more detail at every wine. Nicholas Patel is very famous, well known as a negotiant, and sold out some years back in 2008 to go it alone. And basically what he's done in conjunction with the winemaker Sylvain de Bold is create an estate, a domain, the Domaine de Bellene, and also a maison, in other words, a negotiant operation. So he has these two angles to his business where he's a winemaker and owns specific vines, and he's clearly, that's his love child. And very much the superior product because they can control everything in the process. They also are negotiants for various other producers under the Maison Roche de Bellene. But we're not going to be looking at the Maison stuff tonight. We're looking just at the domain wines. Bellene is a throwback to the original name of Beaune, just some history. When Nicolas decided to make this new domain, he bought a 16th century building in the heart of Beaune, the village, and that has really become the base of his estate. I'm just going to flip now into the share screen for a few minutes while I work my way through this. Yep. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Nothing? Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
So the operation itself draws off 3 major appellations. Now, what you'll see in this map over here in pink is the Côte de Beaune area. And then on the top, where we're going to be tasting quite a lot of wines tonight from the Côte de Nuit area. So their 3 major appellations are Savigny-le-Beaune, Saint-Romain, and Beaune itself. We're going to be tasting a couple of labels from the Beaune region, and then we're tasting from Pommard over here. And then everything else that we taste this evening is going to be coming from Côte de Nuit Village, Nuit Saint-Georges, and right up here close to Von Romani. So you're seeing an expression of very, very different sites made by the same people to a very exacting standard. So it's a really interesting way to let the terroir itself speak and really give you a deeper insight into how the various terroirs actually determine the flavor of the wine as opposed to everything else. It sort of removes all the other extremities or varying factors. So this is the winemaker Sylvain de Bold. I wish my hair was as good as his. I don't think it'll ever be again. He is an incredibly interesting guy to listen to. I've done a fair bit of research before tonight in terms of coming to a deeper understanding of where he and Nicolas have come from in terms of the setting up of this operation. He's very much mindful of the importance of having domain fruit as the center and the most precise expression of what they do. But having said that, they are responsible for 22 different appellations and 64 different parcels of fruit. So you can imagine when it comes to vintage time and getting everything done, it must be absolute mayhem for the team to actually get into the production of each area. So tonight's wines that we're going to be tasting 1 through to 5. I think I've given you all the numbers in the email, so you'll be able to see it quite clearly tonight. What I've done is chosen from the least expensive to the most, and it's so to a certain degree we're going to jump around a little bit from region to region. The first one, the Maison d'Or, is from Beaune. sorry, from Pomard, very close to Bone Village. And then we're going up into Nuit to the Côte de Nuit village, which is really the entry-level region for Côte de Nuit in terms of quality. But if one reads any of the serious wine writers, they're very glowing about the value and quality that can be found in that particular sector of the Nuit. Then we're going into the Beaune to taste their Premier Cru, Hommage à François Potel. And then we're going back into Nuit for Vin Romani, Le Quartier de Nuit. And then we're finishing with Nuit Saint-Georges. And I'm actually quite happy about the lineup and the progression, particularly as we get to the last few wines, because they have an immense story to tell. So looking at 2018 as a vintage for Bellene and for Burgundy as a whole, there's a lot of people walking around who are varied between, was it a warm or hot vintage? And then some people were saying it was a perfect vintage. And what I really like about Sauvad's analysis of this was he defines it as an easy vintage. He says it was warm, but it was warm all the way through. There was no particular time during the entire vintage where any decisions had to be made dependent on the weather. And he was talking in the video clip that I saw of him talking a lot about many other producers have to make harvest decisions based on space. In other words, the grapes ripe and has to come off the vine right away. And then what do we do because it's ripe and there's no space for crushing? There's all these kinds of decisions that affect the end quality of the total harvest. And what Sauvade is saying is that all these regions came at the right time in terms of the harvest, that critical time that's needed when you have to actually take the grapes off the vine. Each and every region seemed to come in sync with each other. So there was no logistical problem. There was no supply chain issues. And the warmth was definitely not something that was overt or murderously hot. It was something which just came, again, every step of the way at the absolute right time. So before we start looking at the wines themselves, just some really interesting points. They're completely organic. They're not certified biodynamic. They've actually pulled back from the labored process of going through all of that. It's for this reason that they believe that they're respectful to the notion of biodynamic principles, but they are more respectful of what Mother Nature wants. And they're very much in tune with stepping back and letting Mother Nature take its course. One of the most interesting and quite alarming statistics that came out from them was over the last 10 years, the effects of climate change have taken away the volume or production equivalent of 3 whole years of harvest. So in other words, 30% of the last 10 years worth of projected production has disappeared because of rain, frost, heat, etc., etc. So it's a moving feast in terms of where Burgundy is now, and trying to create a standard and attain a standard and maintain a standard. And the feeling is that what he's managed to do and what they're working to is a commitment to letting Mother Nature shine as much as possible, but investing very heavily in things like original rootstock. They have they discovered some vines back to the turn of the century that were unaffected by phylloxera in the Beaune Grève vineyard. And they're actually starting a program now where slowly but surely they are using those vines and propagating them right through their domain investments, because it has such really strong genetic value and strong classic DNA, which is something which will endure and enable the quality of their grapes to go on and on for a long while, as opposed to many others who are starting to experience a decline in the quality of their Burgundy because they don't have the quality of their original rootstock is slowly but surely dissipating. We've spoken about diversification. When we get to this, really, I have to say, when I was doing the research for tonight, this was a bit of a a market maker for me. I'd never come across resveratrol before. It's a molecule that exists in grapes, that has links to a profusion of positive health benefits, lower cholesterol, lower heart risks, antioxidants, and a lot of the work that Sylvada's been doing is based around trying to promote the augmentation of this resveratrol molecule in the grapes themselves. They identified it really not a long time ago. They identified the molecule back in 2008. One of the really interesting things about it is that it hates UV light. So by definition, any exposure to light is going to derogate the positive effects of this molecule. Forgive me if I don't sound quite as scientific as I should. He's many light years ahead of me, and it took me a long time to get my arms around this. But the reality of it is, if you promote the existence of this molecule in grapes, it has to be a positive thing from a health point of view. So what they did back in 2010 was they started testing the actual vinification of their wines in the dark, as opposed to in a normal wine operation where there's lights and UV lights or what have you. And back in 2017, they started trialing it against other domains. And what they're finding is a subsistence or a maintenance of the existence of this particular molecule in the wines as a final product. One of the interesting things that really struck home to me when I was listening to him was they had to go back to dealing with cellar issues by candlelight. He says there's this notion of going back in time when they're actually in the winery itself. And that really struck a chord with me, having been really reared in the annals of the New World, where everything is machinery and large industrialization, all the rest of it. He said one of the interesting things is, because you are in the dark and because you're being so careful with exposure to light, you're actually becoming way more sensitive to what you're doing. And he seems to subscribe to the notion that it actually makes them better winemaking people, because they're way more in touch with the material that they're working with and with what they're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, the emphasis is on lower sulfides, and the lower the sulfides is, they can identify by spectral analysis the higher the molecular content of this resveratrol. He says also that he believes there's a knock-on to improved texture, greater aromas, and a general prevalence of fruit that some people might name as flashy or forward, but it's definitely something which demands attention. And I have to say, when I was opening these, whenever I open Burgundies as young as this, I'm really not expecting the level of agility and enthusiasm that was coming out of the glass as I was opening it. So to the first wine, the Maison Dieu, what I think would be possibly of use is to nose the wines in subsequent succession and get a feel for the general phenolics of the noses. For me, the Dieu, you'll notice the density of the vine stocks. Let's go back one click. 10,000 vines per hectare, which is definitely considered high density viticulture. You'll notice as we go through further into the wines later, some actually have even denser concentration of vines. They at 230 meters, which is pretty much the altitude of all the domains that we're looking at, of the parcels that we're looking at tonight, vary between about 205 meters and 250 meters. But as we all know, in Burgundy, what a difference altitude makes, really an extraordinary difference. So just to give you an idea of the actual location, this is the village of Beaune, and the vineyard itself sits here, which is pretty close to the village itself. We're sitting definitely at the pointy end of Pommard here. I think if you nose this wine, for me, one of the important attributes of Pommard always is the notion of plums, sort of hoisin. So salty plum is definitely a big bearing for me. And certainly if you nose the first three, you're getting a very different story of each of them. So I'm just going to go through the geography of these first three, and then I'm going to sit back and drink these with you. The second one is the Côte de Nuit village, which is 10,000 vine stocks again at 241 meters. And I think that might be the highest altitude of everything that we're tasting tonight. So here we were over here. That's where the first wine is, the Maison Dieu. So we're now all the way up, getting really very close to Nuit Saint-Georges. And that's the site of the Côte de Nuit village. It's Violvin, meaning old vines. And this particular area here, where I'm sort of circling here, is the general area of the village fruit or village vineyards. The third one is made up of two different subplots. One with vines, the Le Filet vineyard from 1993, and the second plot is called La Hogeret from my French is appalling, I apologize, from 1962 and 1975. So there's a real sense of history coming in this particular wine from a vine age point of view. So I'm going to jump out of this for a second and taste these wines with you now. Okay, bear with me. Go way too many screens. Oh, there you go. There. So John, you say number 3 is not on Vivino. Not sure why. Definitely all the data on these are on the domain site.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know it's like a blend of a couple of different Premier Cru.
Yeah, it actually gets quite complicated tracking the histology of once you're outside of the domain and you're tasting the Maison stuff, the Negociant fruit, it's just explodes. They really produce a massive amount. So you're going to find a number of the labels from Bellene probably won't find their way as far as Singapore. But let's have a look at these. Really quite evolved for me, the Maison Dieu number 1. There's definitely that sense, that plummy fleshiness on the nose that is much fleshier and sort of more urgent than the second and third one.
Second and third are quite tannic.
Quite tannic, yeah. That's something that wasn't expressed by the producers when I was researching it. They are quite of the opinion that their wines don't manifest too much tannins at an early stage. They seem to subscribe to the idea that the wines are quite forward and easy to drink at an early stage, but have the potential for longer lasting. Let me just taste number 2 and 3. Not a lot of tannin in the Côte de Nuit number 2. Number 2 is definitely more nuanced. I really like the intensity, but almost brittleness of number 2. And that's really quite a strong marker for Côte de Nuit as a region. Kenneth, mushrooms on the Pommard. Yeah, that's also a really, really powerful marker for that region. The original vines were planted in 1928, which is again a fair degree of history for them. They went organic in the Maison de operation in 1992. So there's a lot of history for those vines in terms of being organic. Yeah, I think that tannin might rush up at you, but what you might also think about is the context of it with a bit of cheese or any kind of fatty kind of fruit component with it would definitely allow it to express itself better.
Yeah, on the second tasting, it tastes better.
It starts to evolve, yeah. Yeah, I agree that barnyard thing is there, but it's not nearly as big and dominant as you get in a lot of early bergs. For me, I actually think that thinking in context of a $60 wine, I think it's actually showing itself quite well. Yeah, number one. Again, I guess it's my marketing bias, but if I think about a lot of Burgundy at that price point from 18, we'd probably battle to sit up against that, just in terms of its fruit component, so it'll speak to a lot of palates, and in terms of it's actually quite finished as an entity already.
Yeah, it's much more drinkable. Number 3.
Yeah.
Much more Burgundy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am a big fan of the two, mainly because I get an ulcer when I look at the cost of drinking Codornier wines generally, and it's a particular interest of mine, the village area in Nuits. Yes, he has replanted, but as I said earlier, he's taking this original rootstock that they've got. He said they've got about 200 plants at the moment that they've propagated from this original rootstock, and that's going to form the master DNA for their entire operation. But it's a long process. At the moment, they have 25 hectares of land, and they want to get that up to 40. In context of Burgundy, that's quite ambitious for an operation that really hasn't been going for a very long time. I think that speaks volumes in terms of Nicolas Patel's market penetration and his influence on contract growers. Yeah, that sort of crunch into is something that I particularly I like a lot. Those two plots for the Codornier village are clay and silt, and the other one is dark soil and pebbles. And they make, in France, it's quite interesting. They spend a lot of time talking about the soils, and more so than my experience of New World Burgundy producers, just as a generalization. Maybe I shouldn't even say that, but certainly when I speak to the French Burgundy producers, they are OCD about the variance of soil and the importance that it plays in their products. I think it's quite interesting looking at these three together, because the Homage is a beautiful wine, and I think probably from a style point of view, a step up from the other two. There's a kind of minty coolness about number 3, the Homage. It really appeals to me.
The Homage right now. You could quite easily drink the Homage now.
Yeah,
I don't generally like
really,
it. It's young, but it's quite drinkable and respectable. In other words, it's not as though you feel you're sacrificing.
Yes. Yeah, so all too often I do that. I open wines too early and feel so guilty about it. You're right, it's showing its gravitas and its sense of place now.
It's a bit like the 2015 vintage in Burgundy. The Village wines were actually the best deals around. By 2017, they were drinking fabulously. They were
Oh, really?
relatively pricey because of the vintage, but relative to everything else, they were very, very good, and they are fantastic.
Agree.
ones.
So Al, are you finding that those 15 villages in terms of drinkability now, so you sort of 6 or 7 years in, do you see those as with potential for a whole lot longer, or is it something
Well,
that...
that's a good question. I have not drunk any of them recently. We did a lot of tasting of them. We bought a fair number of them, a group of us, and put some of them away.
Yeah.
But I've still got villages that I've been drinking from the late first decade, which are holding up pretty well. 2010s
Oh, that's excellent.
and a couple of. It depends very much on the maker. And if you're buying village wines from one of the name Grand Cru makers, from good vineyards, the Vaux-Romany or the Chambol, sometimes the Nuit Saint-Georges, they would hold pretty well.
Okay.
I've had 15-year-old ones which are very respectable still.
Because things like Giraud, what else have I been looking at? My field's quite limited for back vintage because it's based really on the labels that we've got. So I've started to be quite excited about the Premier Cru 15s. They seem to be kind of really finding their niche at the moment, but yards and yards of time still.
Yeah.
So Lihao, you say that this is a Zen style of winemaking in terms of the non-intervening, the non-interventionist approach. Is that what you mean? I dare say that's what he means. Yeah, I think that homage is really, really terrific. What I might do is take you guys back to that screen, if I can drive it properly, and take you through the locations of the last two sites, and I'll come back. Yes, yeah, I'm very good at this. All right. I hope you guys can see. So let's go from here. So this is the homage wine number 3 that we've just had, right? So these are the two vineyards. You'll notice another big distinction is the Haugeron, which is the older vineyard, if I've got my data right. Yeah. Yeah, that's the 1962. Is at 266 meters and is a 15-degree slope, which is a fair hill in terms of the vineyard operation, whereas the Poulet is at a 3-degree, so almost flat. And that's going to have a big impact on vine ripening and the times of harvest. It'll also have quite a big influence on what you end up tasting. So number 4, the Vaux-Romany, 250 meters, definitely on a very much flat kind of area, but very, very old vines. Were back in 1927 in terms of the dates, original date of planting. But now, of course, we're looking at an expensive neck of the woods. If you have a look, I really only stuck that in because of this little notation down here. The Domaine Romani Conti is a mere few plots away from where our one is in La Cotier. But what a difference a few plots makes in terms of location and corresponding price. But definitely this parcel of vines is in the blue blood part of Burgundy. And I guess if one was trying to define distill Vaux-Romany into just a few basic words, for me, it speaks of intensity and a velvet kind of component, the sort of iron fist, velvet glove kind of thing. And for me, the wine tonight is certainly showing that velvetiness, but a core of really dark, powerful fruit flavor, intense fruit flavor. Number 5, the Nice Saint-Georges au Chagnon. I've got to take a course on how to pronounce. This is the one that I was referring to earlier, the 12,000 vines per hectare. So super, super dense and concentrated vines. The notion of that is that the closer the vines, the more the vines struggle for nutrients from the soil. And from that struggle for nutrients comes a wine with deeper character and more resounding fruit expression. That's the principle behind it. Again, it's on a hilly outcrop at an 18-degree incline. And here it sits over here in terms of location. The earlier vines that we're looking at earlier are somewhere around about here, and we're now down in Nuits, so a fair way away from that part of town. So back again. So what I think what in principle you'll find is a taste difference between 4 and 5 is this notion of softness or velvetiness, but immense power in number 4 in the one, and then in number 5 the Nuits Saint-Georges, which is attributed to as the bedrock of the Côte de Nuits region. So completely different from the Von Romani, right? The Nuits is earthy and rich, and I'm thinking of iron and certain, a lot of sort of metallic components come out, but in a positive way, not in a negative way. You're voting for one, number 2, number 4, yeah. There's no doubt, it's extraordinary. I'm also quite glad that we looked at 4 first before 5, because I think that the subtlety of 4, the nuances of 4 will be lost once you pile into 5.
Rob, what's the price of 4 and 5?
185.
Both.
For both. I know where I would probably spend my money.
Yeah.
But having said that, some of the most glorious aged Burgundy I've ever had have come from Nuits, no doubt. If anybody wants any of these, I'm gonna, when I do the recording and send you the recording later, I'll send you the link. We've just got options on, I think, 12 bottles of everything. I did this tasting tonight really out of a sense of selfishness, because I was super keen to see this kind of idea with one winemaker over a whole multitude of regions to get an idea of how the different terroir speaks. The other interesting thing about number 4, the Von Romani, he matures those in 600-liter barrels, 50% new, 50% used. And I think that's a useful approach, because remember that tannin we were talking about earlier in the younger wines? There's none of that in this wine. The number 4 is just amazingly finished and polished already. It's a bit hard to go back to 1 and 2 now. I was really loving 2 earlier.
Oh, don't. You were talking up to. Come on.
Yeah, I was talking up to. I just like that price point out of the Nuits at $75. It's
yeah, of 1 and 2 is probably more drinkable, but 3 for price value. Savigny Le Bon number 3 is probably one of the better wines. Particularly Village wines, generic Bon Village wines. The Savigny appellation is still probably. So
it's probably worth the extra $50 to do that trade up.
That's the question. I mean, it's the price point trade-off. All of these things, you buy 3 bottles, 6 bottles, not 12 bottles anyway at the best of times.
And then always regret that later.
Yeah, that's
so John,
the prices of these things are ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
All the way up the line.
I think 2 is a very drinkable wine at the price point.
Yeah, I mean, if I was
very,
being,
very good value.
It's hard, Gordon, for me to go back to 2, just seeing such a polished work of art in 4. because going back to two now,
$185 versus $75, Rob.
Exactly. But there's a little bit of, for me, there's a little bit of hollowness in two now in the mid palate that I didn't see before. In the beginning, I was just all over that texture. That texture's still there. That sort of porcelain-like shimmy or veneer is really, really beautiful even now.
I think it's a lovely, expressive, got great parfait sort of flavor to it. It's very approachable now. It's $75. You know, very drinkable.
But Robert, this is where it starts to get very interesting, because at these prices, I would not be drinking these. I would buy, for the same price, I'd be good New Zealand and Oregon Pinot.
Great question. Great question.
For the same price, with infinitely more depth, tasting of the order of at the same or higher than the 4 and 5. If you buy the top end New Zealand Pinots, Felton Road, Bell Hill is the exception. Bell is expensive, but Bell Hill and the like. Yeah, and with Bell Hill, you've got very good Oregon Pinots as well.
My problem is I can't get immersed in the Oregon stuff because so little of it comes here. I've been promising myself a trip to the Oregon Festival. They do it every now and again. I think it's once a year in January or something. It's a bit like the Centro Otago Pinot celebration. And it's something like 400 Oregon producers all come together for 3 or 4 days. And I think I owe it to myself to actually have a...
No, you should.
Definitely.
Because for me, that's always the trade-off. You know, Burgundy has the name. And the top class Premier Cru, Grand Crus are in a class of their own. It's very hard to match that with anything else, if not impossible. But that's certainly not for everybody. It's not everyday drinking unless you're in the billionaire class. So if you're looking at that good Pinot quality that gives you the reminder of Burgundy, and you want to pay less than $100, say 80 to $100 is what you said is the threshold for what you want to pay for a very good Burgundy. Then you can buy in quantity 6 to 12 bottles. You can buy the New Zealand Pinots, especially from Otago and Martinborough. You can keep them. I've got 15-year-old New Zealand Pinots, which are fantastic.
So how far back?
The new ones are better because the vines are aging.
Vine age,
and the vinification techniques and vineyard techniques are also improving. But
I think
it gets to be that you make the entry point choice about there's a bunch of good name Bellage Burgundy wines you can buy in the 100 to 125 range if you're willing to swallow that price point. Anything more than that, unless you're going to Premier Cru or Grand Cru, my trade-off always is to go back to New Zealand or Oregon.
Yeah, I still don't think that the Centro Otago vines are quite there in terms of vine age. I'm all over the Martinborough options though. You know, they definitely have, they've got a 15-year, 20-year head start on Centro Otago, and you can really see that. I mean, for a couple of years, in fact, Augustine's here tonight. He and I were doing Centro Otago horizontal tasting. So I think we started with 2005, was it Augustine? And we did, over the years, we've done 5, 6, 7, and 8. And very clearly, the wines were good, but the essential vine age that really gives the vine that extra longevity was not there. It's coming. It's slowly but surely in 8 and 9, I'm starting to see it. But in the early years, I just don't think they had the vuma to hold themselves together.
I like what Otago has done for New World Pinot Noir. A bit heavy-handed for my palate, but still.
Yeah.
But what Nico Patel has done for Burgundy, I mean, you know, like in the late 90s, as a younger man, obviously, I could buy his like basic Bourgogne for like, you know, $35 in Melbourne back then. I was like, holy shit. This is amazing. You know, like Melbourne, right? Dress Circle, Yarra, Mornington, Macedon, Bellene, Geelong. But dollar for dollar.
Well, these days, I mean, the last time I made a trip to Melbourne, I was absolutely gobsmacked about the price divergence at the top end for Australian Pinot. You know, you go into the, I don't know, Dan Murphy's, it's the wrong name for Victoria, but whatever the Dan Murphy's of Victoria is, and you get Pinots between 60 and 80, and then you get to another corner of the store where the starting price is 150. And it's really scary how expensive things get and how quickly they get that to that price point. But Alan, you're right. At 185, I'm a bit scared to dip my toe in the water. I'm more than happy to do it at a tasting like this, but not for a Tuesday night pizza wine.
If you're in a market like Singapore where we don't produce wine, we import everything, you have the best of everything that you can get, and you have all the suppliers who bring in different kinds of things. You can be very disciplined about your curve, about price quality trade-offs and where those lines are. When you're in domestic markets, which produces with New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, France, the case might be, your selection is much more limited, and that's where people can start to drive the price points much higher than they would be if you had a choice about for that amount of money, $100, $150, $200. I wanted to drink this particular style of wine. Where would I spend the money? And certainly that's always been my argument when I look at the upper end of South African or Australian wines, particularly when you get to the reds, is am I willing to spend that money versus taking the same amount of money and buying a good Bordeaux?
Well, it's interesting that you say...
Or a good Rhone wine for the same price.
Well, Akashni and I were in Cape Town at the same time last year. Was it Akashni? I think it was last year. And I remember you and I both tasted De La Craft at the same time. And for me, it was like a come to Jesus moment. For me, it is the most amazing cabinet. So I've been humping Lou's leg for a year to get De La Craft. And we actually have it now. They've agreed to. Yes.
So Akashi brought back a bottle of De La Craft from South Africa for me, singing its praises non-stop. And so I let it rest in the cellar for a while to get for a couple of months. Relax, and then I drank and have to admit it was pretty good. I wish I bought more.
Well, the interesting thing was I had a discussion just yesterday on this question of price, because the Sir Lawrence Craft, their very top reserve Cabernet, is 500 Sing a bottle, and that's a complete revelation for me. That it's challenging the Penfolds Bin 707 Cabernet bracket. It's challenging very, very top end second growth Grand Cru. It's a Bordeaux first growth and second growth. It's a really scary price point. But so we'll see. We'll have to do it like this.
Yeah.
Let's see what we think.
You have to organize first to go to De La Craft.
Yeah, they've been very cooperative, but it's very clear that all that wonderful diamond money has helped them create this absolute paradise.
But this is very interesting because I have not tasted any 2018s. And to be honest, I have not bought any 2018s of Burgundy.
Well, I've got
and
two more.
I'm getting to the age where if
you got to look down the track.
I'm not willing to wait 20 years to drink it. I'm going to take the money and buy old Burgundies on the secondary market.
Well, I've got two more sets of 18s from other producers. Justin Girardeau and one other, the name escapes me now. We can probably do something similar to this, just as a means of comparison. It'll be do them sort of quite soon, so that we can just keep our memories fresh on how they look. And also, it's from various plots similar to what we're seeing tonight, so it should be quite interesting. What I don't understand, I really tried hard tonight to get the information for you guys, was on this homage Premier Cru thing. What I couldn't understand was whether they changed the style in homage to the winemaker every year, because the current release on the website for number 3 is homage to Mascarello in Barolo. So what I don't understand is whether they're making the wine just as an honor and honoring him, or whether they're trying to emulate the style of that particular winemaker. I couldn't get that information to really figure out. But yes, I think if I was in the buying frame of mind, 2 and 3 would probably be where I was.
They're all quite drinkable.
Well, the one point that the winemaker made to quite a strong degree was this idea of easy early approach. It seems to be something that organic Burgundy really does. They're quite ambulant and approachable at an earlier stage. And they have a focus on cleanness. In other words, And that's something that I'm told the Burgundian winemakers of the previous generation were not particularly good at or particularly obsessed with. So everything's sort of, you know, as scrupulous as that possibly can be. So I think everybody would agree the wine of the night's 4.
Actually, we're in the homage corner.
Oh, are you? Yeah. I think that I love the homage.
4 being the fast follower.
Well, I'm loving 5 because it's got so much to speak of in terms of that iron filings, that classic red clay, red earth kind of component. I like the ballsiness of 5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like
it's
5
no,
too.
4
It's
and
an
5 are
iron
probably my favorite, simply because Romani and Chambord are my 2 favorite Burgundy areas.
Sure, those are expensive hobbies.
Yeah,
Well, everybody else
I
is right.
discovered Vin Romani too late, but this to me does
Ooh.
not have Vin Romani what I picture traditional Vin Romani nose and flavor. So
Are you putting that in the Von basket? Is that for you a classic expression of Von? No?
I guess not what I'm used to. I get
Okay.
more.
It's
The
interesting you
nose
say.
Romani feels to me like it's not there. So and the flavor I get like kind of a greenness, and so maybe that's just young. But
Okay.
if you gave me that, I wouldn't say it's Vin Romani. I enjoy
Okay.
it, but I would probably do 3, 5, 4. Yeah.
3, 5, 4. They, in the winery notes, they make quite a big point of aligning the location of the site to Vougeot. They make quite a big deal about how close it is to Vougeot and almost how it almost might be Vougeot-like. Now, I've not drunk nearly enough Vougeot to be able to make a call on that.
Well, I would argue we've tried that several times. We have drunk not dozens at a time, but on multiple occasions we've done Vougeot horizontals. Same
Really?
different makers like this, and we can get zero typicity out of it. And
Really?
vary from very sophisticated to average palates, like I would describe mine as average, but some seriously good. And then every time we say there's nothing distinctive about a Vougeot, except that it's very nice and drinkable. As opposed to how on a Chambord or a Vaux Romani or a Louis Saint-Georges
Shows a certain style.
pick up and people doing it blind tasting can say that's this. On a
Yeah.
show, it's very hard to do that.
Well, next time you do a Vougeot tasting party, it's yours.
Yeah. Order 2 cases.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's much more experience on Vin Romani than me. So do you get Vin Romani nose and flavor profile from that Vin Romani?
No, number 5 is New Saint-Georges, number 4. It's not about number 4.
I haven't tasted.
Number 5's.
Number 5 is New Saint-Georges. Number 4.
Yeah,
It's,
number 4.
You
Yeah.
know, right?
No, if this was blind tasting, I actually wouldn't place any of these, to be honest. I'm just saying for what it is, and the drinkability for a 2018, which is for me on any kind of red one.
Doesn't seem like a bottle.
Normally very young.
I think that the Nuit really might speak to my New World palate. I really love Nuit. I think I like the brusqueness of it, the sort of very definite point of view that it's got. I mean, I really enjoy that. Well, I'm going to switch off the recording now so we can say what we really think.